Essen, Germany. The discussion over compulsory military service in Germany, long suspended, has returned to the centre of national debate, with rising security concerns in Europe and persistent recruitment shortfalls in the Bundeswehr. Calls for reinstating conscription have gained momentum. Leading politicians, defence officials and civil society voices are weighing in on whether the country needs a new model of service to meet modern challenges. For more than a decade, Germany has relied solely on volunteers to fill its armed forces. But as threats in Europe have escalated, from Russia's war in Ukraine to hybrid security pressures, officials warn that the Bundeswehr is struggling to maintain the troop levels and readiness that NATO commitments demand. The Bundeswehr's strength today stands at just under 183,000 soldiers, well below the peacetime target of slightly more than 200,000. According to Federal Defence Minister Boris Pistorius, SPD, the armed forces need up to 60,000 additional active soldiers to meet current security requirements. Pistorius has made it clear that the all-volunteer approach is no longer sufficient. He has pointed to the glaring gaps in recruitment and training infrastructure, warning that without a new model of service, the Bundeswehr will continue to fall short of both domestic and NATO-level obligations. The decade-long suspension of conscription has left not only a shortage of personnel and reservists, but also a broken system of registration and enlistment. There is no longer a reliable database of citizens fit for service, defence officials note. Barracks lack the capacity to house larger numbers of recruits, and instructors are in short supply. Despite these challenges, Defence Minister Boris Pistorius is advocating an initial approach based on voluntary participation rather than a full return to mandatory conscription. He favours a system modelled after Sweden's hybrid scheme. Under this plan, all young men would first fill out a questionnaire assessing their fitness and interest in service. The Bundeswehr would then approach selected candidates to invite them to serve. The idea, Pistorius argues, is to make military service more appealing while gradually rebuilding the logistical backbone to support higher troop numbers. Pistorius has said that the ultimate goal is to rebuild both capacity and morale. He believes that an attractive voluntary programme, combined with incentives, could help reverse the recruitment crisis without immediately triggering the political battles that a mandatory draft would bring. Not all leaders agree with Pistorius's voluntary approach. Henning Otter, the Bundestag's Commissioner for the Armed Forces and a CDU member, is outspoken in his support for reinstating mandatory conscription. Otter argues that the Swedish model proves the effectiveness of mandatory medical examinations combined with selective service. Otter has stressed that making military service more attractive is also crucial. He proposes measures such as counting time in service toward waiting semesters for university admission, a move aimed at easing the academic transition for young recruits. The German Reservists Association backs Ott's view, warning that NATO's collective defence goals, including a target of around 250,000 active soldiers for Germany, cannot be achieved without some form of mandatory service. The political divide is stark. While CDU leaders are pressing for mandatory service, the governing coalition led by the SPD's parliamentary leader, Matthias Miersch, stands firmly opposed. Miersch has categorically rejected calls for a return to conscription, pointing to the coalition agreement that enshrines voluntary participation as the guiding principle. Some voices in the CDU argue that the security environment demands more decisive measures. Thomas Roverkamp, chairman of the Bundestag's Defence Committee, supports compulsory service not just for the military but also for civil and social sectors, arguing that it would strengthen both national defence and society's resilience. Even Federal President Frank-Walter Steinmeier has weighed in, advocating for a model of compulsory military service that would combine national defence duties with broader civic contributions. The return of the draft is not merely a policy debate, but also a question of social values. For years, Germany has leaned toward a professional, volunteer-based military while encouraging civic service in areas such as healthcare, disaster relief and education. Proponents of reinstating conscription argue that national security and solidarity now demand a shared burden. Critics counter that mandatory service risks reviving old divisions and may prove impractical in an era when the Bundeswehr still lacks the facilities to accommodate large numbers of recruits. The Bundeswehr recruitment campaign, visible on posters in cities like Essen, bearing slogans such as "Germany needs a strong army," reflects the urgency of the challenge. But despite aggressive outreach, volunteer numbers remain insufficient. At shooting ranges in Oberwichtach and during training exercises at bases such as Münster and Augustdorf, the gap between political debate and operational reality is visible. Instructors report difficulties in scaling up training due to limited resources and personnel. During a visit to Bundeswehr Battalion 203, Defence Minister Boris Pistorius observed exercises and listened to soldiers' concerns. Soldiers spoke about logistical hurdles, from outdated barracks to the need for better conditions for families and reservists. One young recruit, speaking at a recruitment office in Essen, reflected a sentiment common among many new entrants: "And I would really like to stay in the medical field." Lisa Hoffman, a 23-year-old applicant hoping to combine her service with her long-term professional goals. Germany's debate comes at a time of heightened security pressures across Europe. NATO allies are urging Berlin to step up defence spending and troop commitments as tensions persist in Eastern Europe. The Bundeswehr has recently participated in international missions, including the now concluded UN peacekeeping mission in Mali. Returning troops disembarked at Wunstorf Air Base last December, bringing home lessons that underscore the need for better preparation, equipment and manpower. Joint exercises with allies, such as the German-Israeli Blue Wings air drills and NATO artillery training with the Panzerhaubitze 2000 howitzers, highlight the demands placed on Germany's forces. Many officers believe that without a larger pool of trained personnel, such commitments will stretch the Bundeswehr thin. The renewed debate over conscription is shaping up to be one of the defining security policy discussions of the decade. Policymakers must weigh the urgency of shoring up Germany's defence readiness against the political, logistical and social costs of reintroducing the draft. As Europe's security landscape shifts, the question for Germany is not simply whether to revive conscription, but how to design a service model that is both effective and sustainable. For now, the country faces a crossroads: whether to rely on the voluntary enthusiasm of a new generation of recruits or to return to a system in which military service is seen as a civic duty shared by all. Boris Pistorius, Defence Minister, advocates a voluntary model inspired by Sweden, warning of infrastructure gaps. Henning Otter, Bundestag Armed Forces Commissioner, pushes for mandatory medical exams and reinstated conscription to meet NATO targets. Matthias Miersch, SPD parliamentary leader, categorically opposes reinstating the draft, citing coalition commitments to voluntary service. Thomas Roekamp, CDU Defence Committee Chair, supports compulsory service across both military and civil sectors. Frank-Walter Steinmeier, Federal President, endorses a hybrid form of compulsory military service with civic participation. Lisa Hoffman, recruit applicant, represents the perspective of young Germans seeking to integrate service with personal career goals. Germany's debate over conscription reflects broader questions about national identity, security responsibilities, and generational expectations. As threats grow more complex and alliances demand more of their members, the country must decide whether to adapt its military service to meet these challenges head-on. Whatever path Berlin chooses, it will shape not only the future of the Bundeswehr, but also Germany's role in European security for decades to come.